overlooked in his remarks yesterday as he spoke about the land, air, and space domain. We're going to talk about the maritime domain, and it's a domain that is sometimes that was in the media sort of for fairly much a year ago, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, but has sort of fallen off the radar to some extent. Because of course for several reasons. It's a domain that I call the battle for the Black Sea, it has to do a lot to do with Ukraine, not just but as well as all the other littoral states. It's fallen off the screen because of course sea lanes are operating fairly normally. Grain shipments are continuing. Relatively few Russian naval assets are operating in the Black Sea. Ukraine has in fact been winning the battle of the Black Sea. Its strategy of sea denial has been quite successful, using UAVs, MAVs, and other means to make it too risky for the Russian Black Sea fleet to operate too close to Ukraine. Of course, the land war, which we heard about in the last panel, is much more intense, and of course, who occupies land actually, that really does matter. We need to think about the maritime domain, even if it's not necessarily in the media every day. And for that, we have a fantastic panel here. Joining us from Kiev, or from, well, I'm not sure, are you in Kiev, Admiral? From Kiev is Admiral Kabanenko, Ihor Kabanenko. Welcome, sir. From 1983 to 1990, he served in the Soviet Navy in various positions, up to commander of the ship and chief of staff of the Missile Ships Division. After 1993, he served in the Ukrainian Armed Forces, serving as chief of staff, chief of operations and chief of staff of the Ukrainian Navy, the military representative of Ukraine to NATO, chief of operations of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and first deputy chief of defense. He retired in 2013 with the rank of admiral. In 2014, Admiral Kabanenko served as deputy minister of defense and as deputy minister of defense for European integration. He is currently president of the Ukrainian Advanced Research Project Agency, which focuses on high-tech solutions and products defense, which we're seeing every day in operation in Ukraine. At the end of the table is Dr. Milan Vego, university professor, and the Admiral R.K. Turner Professor of Operational Art at the Naval War College in Newport. He obtained his political asylum in 1976 from his native Bosnia-Herzegovina. Served for 12 years as a naval officer and 4 years in the Merchant Marine. Dr. Vego holds a PhD in modern European history from George Washington and is a licensed master mariner. He's the author of 14 books, very, very impressive, and has published numerous articles and essays in various professional journals, including on Soviet naval tactics, the battle for light, 1944, operational warfare at sea, and his latest, exercising control of the sea. Dr. Vego is also the author of a textbook on joint operational warfare used at the Naval War College and a number of other service academies. And last but not least, Glen Howard, should need no introduction, president of the Saratoga Foundation, which informs about strategic importance of the war against Ukraine, the struggle for mastery of Eurasia by Russia and China, and produces the Saratoga podcast. If you don't know that already, I highly recommend it. Glenn was president of the Jamestown Foundation for 20 years and extensively dealt with Russia and Eurasia. So he is an expert on Russia and Eurasia, author of or co-editor of all sorts of publications, including Russia's military strategy and doctrine, all sorts of stuff and published it widely as well. So we will be talking about the maritime domain. This is first we'll hear from our three panelists, but I will argue later on that that this maritime domain is more complex and is an essential part of Russia's war against Ukraine. because Russia has been on the back foot in Belarus, in the Black Sea, having lost a third of its Black Sea fleet and relocated most of its fleet to Novorossiysk and elsewhere. But it is also well positioned to dominate the Black Sea and the Black Sea region if the guns fall silent and it remains in control of Crimea and such large parts of the Black Sea littoral, not to mention the Sea of Azov. I'll go into that later on, but we wanted to hear first perhaps from Admiral Kabanenko. Admiral, what does it look like from your perspective in Kyiv?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. First of all, let me express my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to participate in this year's security dialogue and speak in front of you together with high professional panelists. And thank you very much for the introduction. Against the backdrop of the operational dynamics in the Black Sea, we increasingly hear what Ukraine, with its asymmetric strategy at sea, has revolutionized the nature of naval warfare. This is absolutely true, in my view, especially when they are talking not only about the Black Sea, but more widely about inland seas. In this regard, it is worth to note that lacking sufficient length of sea coastline, as known, Russia has captured up to 80% of our country's coastline since 2014, and the ability to successfully conduct fleet against fleet naval battles, Ukraine absolutely reasonably abandoned attempts at direct clashes at sea and relied on asymmetry, which in fact turned weakness of Ukraine's sea power in its classical dimension into the strength. The main operational method was chosen to be the impact of naval and air drones flow, as well as land-based anti-ship missiles and other, let's say, mosquito assets on the enemy from different directions, which successfully implemented well-known principle of hundreds of small cuts to neutralize the aggressive ambitions of a large and powerful enemy. As a result, Ukraine has destroyed or damaged up to 30% of Russian warships, driving most of them not only beyond its littoral waters, but also forcing them to abandon their naval bases in occupied Crimea. Russia has lost almost half of its pre-war landing ships capability in the Black Sea. Let me stress what these results they achieved without a single classic battle between opposing fleets. It is worth noting what vary of attacks by sea-based drones on attack ships. The Kremlin has significantly reduced strikes with sea-based caliber cruise missiles. The impressive results of reducing Moscow's naval capability in the Black Sea, Ukraine's success in its sea control and sea denial missions is also characterized by certain operational red lines established in the end of 2024, which Russian warships are trying not to cross, fearing attacks by Ukrainian asymmetric naval assets. These lines are definitely not stable, but they exist even taking into account their flexibility. Moscow is symmetrically strengthening the defense on such lines against attacks from sea and air, primarily near the Novorossiysk naval base, the Kerch Bridge, and infrastructure adjacent to the breach in the ports of Kavkaz and Kerch. As of today, opponents don't engage at open sea. It was before, at the end of during 2003, 2023, 2024, but are forcing on use long-range weapons, mainly drones, seeking to hit coastal infrastructure facilities. Traditionally, the Kremlin is not selective in its aerial attacks on Odessa and other Ukrainian ports, hitting civilian infrastructure and residential building caused casualties among civilians. While Ukrainian drones focus on strikes on military objects and oil refineries in the Krasnodar Krai and Rostov regions, which directly provide support to the Russian warships and subs in Novorossiysk naval base, as well as on oil pumping stations would replenish Russia's war budget through the flow of Russian oil products by sea. Does it mean that such operational status quo at sea be maintained this year? I'm not sure, as such a state of unstable equilibrium will last long. Moscow, in its strategy to improve geostrategic position in southern seas, will most likely seek to neutralize its surface fleet's maneuver limitations created by Ukrainian naval drones and other asymmetric means that prevent the Kremlin from ensuring the necessary concentration of naval power. In turn, improving weather conditions and the accumulation of modernized Mosquito capabilities will allow Ukraine to intensify maritime and riverine operation in key areas of its national interest. So a new stage of naval warfare is looming ahead. But in any case, if Ukraine continues to rely on asymmetry at sea, this will keep the enemy surface fleet on edge, constrain its actions, and force to take refuge in protected naval bases as far away from asymmetric means as possible. But what will be if the ceasefire regime installed? In this case, Turkey most likely revoked the Montreux Convention's Article 19 restrictions concerning the transit of warships through the Bosphorus. And it is easy to predict the Russian warships line up to replace, even more than replace, those sunk by Ukraine. The loss of the Tartus naval base in Syria will make the Russians even keener to do this. In EU, strong Russian presence in the Black Sea would be a problem, even if the ceasefire holds, because these forces would be free to conduct gray zone operations at which they are proficient. These activities are designed to sit below the threshold of warfare and be hard to legally counter. Raiding, sabotage, navigation system hacking, hidden naval mines laying, and seabed warfare, etc., would all come back into play. So a post-ceasefire Black Sea seems to be a complex and potentially dangerous environment there. Maintaining the free flow of trade will be quite challenging. In this regard, question arises, how do we counter this to avoid such depressing a post-ceasefire scenario and to defend the gains achieved in the northwestern part of the Black Sea? Definitely, missions to provide freedom of navigation and national interest and exclusive maritime economic zones such as patrolling, MCM, inspections, and others will return to the agenda. It is known from past what frigates, corvettes, and MCM ships get along well with this. Montreux Convention allows warships of non-littoral states to pass through the Bosphorus to navigate the Black Sea for 21 days. In this regard, I hope NATO states' warships will not be left out of common interest with Ukraine, Romania, and other allied littoral states to provide freedom of navigation, including to maintain the seaborne flow of Ukrainian grain to world markets. Such joint missions could be a good opportunity not only to protect sea lines, but also practice interactions with Ukrainian asymmetric means, both manned and unmanned. At the same time, let me draw attention to three important aspects in connection with the above, which, in my opinion, should be taken into account. The first concerns geography. As well known, geography matters, and it is different for an ocean. It's different for an ocean and inland sea, which is what the Black Sea is. And this difference is quite significant. In inland sea, if you do not have enough coastline, then your ability to create a dispersed system of protected naval bases is limited. As a result, your frigates and corvettes, no matter how modern and powerful they are, find themselves in a grim condition of basin development and maneuvering, while requiring significant efforts to ensure their combat sustainability. All this is costly, but ultimately ineffective in symmetrical naval clashes with a strong adversary, what has extended sea line and serious blue water geopolitical ambitions. So such a surface fleet deployed in inland sea will somehow work in peacetime, but once war starts, it may have serious problems in combat engagement with Russia, connected with geography. I'm not revealing anything new here. The core influence of a country's geostrategic position on the success of its naval operations in the inland sea was justified by German naval theorists as early as the interwar period of 20th century and proved in the reality. In my opinion, learning this lesson could be useful not only for Ukraine. The second is about complexity and particularity of the security situation in the Black Sea. As a matter of fact, it requires constant, deliberately structured and coordinated use of naval forces from different directions to achieve particular objectives by means of a sustainable pulsing. I'm not sure what even dozen frigates and corvettes could be able to do so efficiently in asymmetric engagement with the Russian surface fleet covered by the A2AD system deployed on occupied Crimea, as well as post-ceasefire regime missions. Russia fights symmetrically in the Black Sea and will continue to do so because Moscow is a prisoner of its own ambitions to project sea power into Mediterranean and beyond. They need large warships to do so. But as experience evidence, capability to neutralize aggressive Russian naval posture at the Black Sea is well provided by asymmetric assets, what means small, fast manned and unmanned ones, able to be performed in swarms to challenge more robust enemy. The third mentioned asymmetric assets demonstrate effectiveness in so-called cascaded naval operations. Which, due to a spread number of such means, enable multiplier simultaneous missions of enemy gear from different directions and even warfare domains, what are quite difficult to accomplish with large surface platforms or submarines. Such is especially important for riverine operations, particularly in sea river nodes like Dnipro, Bug estuary, and Danube Delta, as freedom of navigation in both is critical. It is worth to note what Swedish CB-90 combat crafts transferred to Ukraine, as well as one other small fast riverine boats from the US and other Western nations have significantly improved our ability to do so, but such needs to be improved yet. Thus, I don't see a better solution for Ukraine to neutralize Russian geopolitical ambitions in the Black Sea region in the wartime and after ceasefire installation. Then fleet of mutually integrated small and fast manned and unmanned means can represent. Definitely, Ukraine's need for small, fast manned and unmanned naval platforms for conducting asymmetric maritime and riverine operations, as well as mobile missile defense systems to protect important coastal infrastructure facilities remains relevant. And I am absolutely sure if we continue to employ both manned and unmanned technologies, integration into naval operations and structures smartly, aware of the naval drones' talent in missions, as well as manned, unmanned interoperability needs and ways to achieve, we preserve a competitive combat advantage at sea over Russia. Thank you for your attention, and would appreciate your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Why don't we wait for the question?
Thank you.
We wait for the questions until the Q&A period after everyone has spoken. But I'm glad you highlighted the role of the Montreux Convention. In fact, if you know when the guns eventually fall silent, that will presumably open the floodgates for the Russian naval assets to return to the Black Sea and reinforce all the ships and other naval assets that are now either on the bottom of the Black Sea or in various various forms of destruction or farther away. And this will definitely the occupation of illegal occupation of Crimea has already so transformed the geopolitics of the Black Sea region that this will make it even worse. Professor Vego.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm really very pleased to be here. I'm, as you know, professor at the Naval War College, and my topic is actually dealing with these issues, not specifically Black Sea, but naval warfare.
Can everybody hear?
Especially from operational perspective. I would just say I cannot compete with Admiral Kabanenko concerning the Ukrainian situation, you know, and the Black Sea. I had never been Black Sea. I was in many times in the Baltic and so on, but I was just give you some thoughts here, and I will always start with the strategy. I think, you know, that's what, you know, affects the force composition and construction programs. So I would say that, you know, in Ukrainian case, certainly they need to develop the, and I'm sure they're working on that, on maritime strategy in a.
Can you speak louder? Oh. If you just speak closer to the microphone. Yeah, just.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah, okay. I would say they need nation security or grand strategy, and then you develop maritime strategy. And I would say in their case, based if they have a durable ceasefire and they have a time, because they have a lot of competing, you know, requirements to reconstruct the country, and also the land forces, air forces, and the naval forces. Okay, so it means that would require time and efforts and money. And I would say they should have, in my judgment, a combination of defensive and offensive maritime strategy. Offensive strategy should be pertaining to the northern part of the Black Sea, because it's so critical for the export of grain and everything else. It means that strategy should move from sea denial to, you know, sea control, and then northeastern part, Black Sea, and the rest of the Black Sea should be sea denial. Okay, that require then also different forces. You know, as you know, when you have a sea controls, there are a lot of sometimes confusion. Even in the United States, you know, many people think just by having a naval forces a presence, you know, somehow you control something. Sea control is always, you know, conducted when the wars during the hostilities, not in the peacetime, and main methods to obtain sea control, the surface, subsurface, and air, is destroying enemy forces at sea and at their bases, and then weakening enemy forces over time, what we call attrition. And sometimes if you have a, you know, you can also have a naval blockade. So clearly this is not an option for the, you know, so that in terms of sea control, sea denial is different because it is a negative object, and you try to methods of obtaining the sea denial, they are different than for sea control. So I would say that in terms of sea denial, you have to avoid decisive encounter with the enemy forces. You have to also mostly, you know, rely on attrition. It means weakening enemy forces over time. And in terms of the what forces that Ukraine should have, is that I would say that, like in land warfare, you need a combined arms approach. That means that they should also develop, you know, surface forces, submarine forces, naval aviation, and then also mine warfare, amphibious, and combat with coastal defense. And then another key element of unconventional forces between naval, special forces, and what all they have, their unmanned vehicles. That means the UAVs, area vehicles, the surface vehicles, and also underwater. So that's I think how I see that. That's the only way they actually can somehow obtain strategic objectives in case of renewed war and hostilities, you know, in the Black Sea. One key element here is that none of these forces can really survive without air defense or missile defense. Individual require also invasion. So naval bases and ports, and I think most important defense of the protection infrastructure, because the Russians have been very effective in destroying a lot of infrastructure throughout Ukraine. But this is now dealing with littoral area, and I think that's in essence what I argue, that yeah, they require time and money and efforts, but they have to go beyond unmanned vehicles. I think there are a lot of misperception in my judgment here. Many people think that somehow Navy and navies should just change it from manned platforms to unmanned. I think that really makes no sense, because unmanned vehicles are not superior to anything what is run by humans. I have been always very impressed with the Ukrainians in terms of their ability to innovate, to be creative. But when you see the successes they have, when you look context, none of these Russian ships sailed in a formation. There were no organic air defense, and they were successful, okay? But also, most of these platforms were destroyed, especially USVs, and also a great number of the UAVs. So you cannot build Navy based on these platforms, But I'm not arguing they should not have it. I would just argue that unmanned vehicles should be under separate command, under the Joint Force Command. They should play a major role also in a war at sea. But I think it would be a mistake somehow thinking that with unmanned vehicles you can even deny you need some presence, and if they don't have a presence after the mission is accomplished, okay? We have now, I think, a lot of people here, I think, as I said, repeating myself, think that this is now a total change in character of warfare. Unmanned vehicles should supplement existing platforms. They cannot be, replaced. Okay? And in terms of the ships, other ships, I think, certainly frigates and light frigates, not platforms for the Ukrainian Navy. I think they need the multi-purpose corvettes, as they're now building in Turkey, and so on. And then fast combat craft, and then also the conventional submarines. Okay, and I think they need some smaller forces or amphibious forces, and especially mine warfare. There's been mining and also mine countermeasures. Okay? So that's all what I have to say. We might have some discussion later on details. Okay? Thanks. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Professor Vego. That's actually those very important points about the incredibly important role that technology has, the Ukrainian ingenuity has played in pushing back the Russian Black Sea Fleet. However, it's not a panacea. There are other aspects too that technology is great, but there are other factors as well that need to be kept in mind. Glen, how does it look from your perspective?
I think everything in the Black Sea begins and ends with Montreux Convention when it comes to naval warfare. So I think that's a very important point. And I just want to say how happy I am, delighted to be here speaking again at this conference. Thank you, Walter, again for inviting me. Great to see many familiar faces, and I appreciate Matthew's wonderful abilities here to moderate and also share his own insights. Very few people in Washington look at the Black Sea on a continuous basis, so I'm happy to be among those few. And obviously, Admiral Kabanenko is what I would say is the intellectual brainchild of how we think about naval warfare in the Black Sea. I've learned a lot from him. But that said, I'm sitting next to Milan Vego, and a veteran anti-communist crusader who's fought against communist governments for most of his life, and it's just great that he's here to offer his expertise, because let me explain why that expertise is different when we talk about naval warfare and the Black Sea and what to expect coming forward. Now, I do have a theme for what I want to talk about today, and that is I do want to talk about what a post-ceasefire situation looks for what it may look like in the Black Sea and what it means for Ukraine. So everybody here is very interested and wants to know how that's going to affect the situation. But Milan Vego has been he's been a key intellectual writer on naval warfare at the Naval War College for as many decades as I've known him in a short time, but I've known his work for many decades, since the 1980s. And why is that important? Because in the United States, in U.S. naval strategy, they're always kind of thinking about aircraft carriers and big ships, and obviously they look at Taiwan and they think of the battles of Midway and kind of think about that. But when it comes to Ukraine, think about Black Sea. They don't have a tendency to think about nations that are like Ukraine, and even as the former Yugoslavia were basically had maritime capabilities and ambitions. And so the way they approached navies was much different. I would say almost a continental mindset as opposed to a maritime concept, kind of like in the legacy of Alfred Thayer Mahan, the one of the founding fathers of the U.S. Navy, certainly in the intellectual domain. So it's really important to make those two distinctions. And Milan has contributed a lot to that in his writings. I've looked at his thoughts. He's given a wonderful kind of idea and presentation here that he was working late last night, feverishly typing away for Walter to present this. And today he came down here from Rhode Island on his own accord, Walter. And so I think we should appreciate his presence and that of Ihor's because I'm going to get a lot of benefit out of it. Now, what I'd like to say is that when you look at the post-ceasefire environment in Black Sea, which is where we are, oh, and I wanted to say one other thing. I wanted to make a plug for my Eyes on Eurasia podcast that Matthew so generously mentioned. And so go to Glenn's Substack and subscribe to it. Got a lot of stuff on there about our area of the world, and that you're interested in Russia. Andriy Zagorodnyuk is sitting in the audience. Just had a podcast with him a couple of weeks ago about Putin's strategy and Trump. So want to put in a plug for that. But as Saratoga Foundation, we're very obviously interested in Ukraine. So that said, so the beginning of strategy and thinking about post-ceasefire environment inside of the Black Sea is the issue of Montreux Convention. So what specifically may happen in Article 19 of Montreux is if they suspend Montreux, which has prevented outside naval non-littoral powers like the United States and Great Britain can't enter warships in. Now, Montreux is a double-edged sword because it affects Russia. They can't bring, in a time of war, they can't bring warships into the Black Sea. So when Ukraine destroys Russian warships, they can't replace them unless they bring it through Russia's internal waterways, through the Volga Canal. And that's the only way they can do it. But they've got some operational problems there in doing that. So bottom line is it's frozen to war, and the more warships Ukraine destroys, the more it's creating a balance. But the minute Article 19 is unfrozen, and Russia can then start bringing warships into the Black Sea. Now, there's the good side of that, and there's the bad side. That's the bad side. The good side is that American warships and the Royal Navy can begin operating in the Black Sea again. But the problem there is that they call it 21 days at a time naval strategy, which means that the non-littoral naval powers are limited in how much time they can be operated in the Black Sea, and it's 21 days, and then they have to leave the Black Sea and reset the clock. So the plus side is that once that's lifted, they'll be able to return. And so the key thing that Ihor mentioned, which you really need to focus on here, is that Ukraine in this war has lost 80% of its coastline. So we are now down to a rump coastline of Ukraine that's very much fluctuates around Odessa. And as many of you know, Odessa, the lifeblood of the Ukrainian economy, is grain. And so the problem has been that American strategic thinkers have never really looked at the Black Sea through a strategic prism. In other words, to understand its value, they have to understand what is the strategic importance of the Black Sea. And that's where I like to remind people that the Black Sea is to grain what the Persian Gulf is to oil. And so if we keep that in mind about why it matters geopolitically and it's important, and when you see Ukraine and Russia fighting each other in Africa to feed Africa with stolen grain from Ukraine, but Ukraine is also participating in it. So there is a competition going on for that. So for those markets, so the grain matters geopolitically. Now, once the Montreux Convention is lifted and unfrozen, then these warships can return, and so that will mean that there will be some protection for Odessa, and there will be some protection because of Romania's capabilities as a NATO ally, and also has a naval presence in the Black Sea. But these type of, as Ihor pointed out, there's asymmetric capabilities, which Ukraine has used with the Mosquito, with its use of UAVs, uncrewed surface vehicles, and UAVs, and fighting Russia. And then Russia fights with stationary assets, which fights symmetrically with those platforms like big warships. So once this happens and Russia can reinforce itself in an event of ceasefire, there's going to be a lot of problems because Ukraine is currently building two big platforms, corvettes in Turkey. They spent $300 million per corvette. And so they got $600 million. They've invested in these two corvettes in Turkey with Turkish-trained naval crews of 300 men apiece that will return and constitute this quote-unquote new surface navy for Ukraine. That's great, but the point is that they don't have a port and they don't have naval infrastructure to support it. So the operational requirements of all the things that Milan talked about in terms of joint command and strategy and all that, it's really way beyond what Ukraine has the capability right now to be able to implement, because basically it's been fending off the Russians. And let's face it, Ukraine's naval strategy has been through its uncrewed drones that have been directed by Kirill Budanov, the head of Ukrainian military intelligence. So basically, you've got an army guy directing a naval campaign against the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. So this is just to start off with, is really complicated, but it's the truth. And so this is the problem. So how does Ukraine break the boa constrictor of what Russia trying to strangle Ukraine economically in this post-ceasefire environment? And we don't have that yet. I mean, we don't have an ability, and even I think we need to think now about how the U.S. approaches this problem with its allies once they can resume returns to the Black Sea. Now, what you had prior to the war in 2022 was the HMS Defender of the Royal Navy, backed up by a Dutch frigate, exercised freedom of navigation against the coast of Crimea. And it really got the Putin's knickers in a twist, because it really they exercised freedom of navigation, came very close to Crimea, and we're going to have to go back to this idea about what naval presence the United States wants to utilize in the Black Sea with its allies versus the Russians. Now, in this war so far, we have pushed the Russians, Ukraine and its allies have been able to push the Russians from Western Crimea to safe sanctuary in northeastern part of the Black Sea, in Port Kavkaz, where Ihor was mentioning. So in that area, Novorossiysk, they basically pushed the fleet into that base because they were running out of space in the docks in Sevastopol, and they're worried about Ukrainian drone strikes on those docks, and so they've had to redeploy to that part of the Black Sea. The current stages of fighting now is that Ukraine is attacking all that infrastructure on the northeastern part of the Black Sea. In Rostov, there was a drone strike the other day. They are trying to destroy Ukrainian energy infrastructure, Russian energy infrastructure in Krasnodar province, and push the Russians back. So once there's a ceasefire, then Russia will try to return all these naval assets back to Sevastopol, and we're back to what Milan and what Ihor said, is suddenly the Russians bearing a grudge because they're hanging on by a thread in Syria. They want to return to the Mediterranean and create a nuisance problem for the United States and in the Mediterranean. So a lot of the problems for Russia that cause for the United States and its allies in the Mediterranean come from the Black Sea. So if American policymakers can approach it from that perspective, maybe they can figure out a solution. Now, Ukraine has been gifted 16 naval assault aircraft called CB-90s that Ihor mentioned. These are fast attack boats, and Ukraine has been gifted these by Sweden, and this will constitute a new Mosquito fleet operational capabilities by Ukraine. Now, you got these 2 corvettes that they're going to get from Turkey, but they're going to go to port. And once they sit in the port, they don't have a naval-based infrastructure to really operate from, and they're inexperienced there. And this will take away from the Mosquito fleet ability to be able to strike and hit everything that Russia has when it starts moving its naval assets back. So the post-Ukraine ceasefire environment is going to be a very contentious one. And Ukraine will have to depend on its grain exports again, but limited space to operate and maneuver in the northwestern part of the Black Sea, because we don't know what the ceasefire, what agreement will mean. It's really at that stage right now. We don't know. So they're in the talking stage. But it's very good to kind of conceptualize how the post-ceasefire environment will affect Ukraine. So, as Matthew says, when the guns fall silent, we need to start thinking about that. And I'll stop there. I'm at my limit, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, that was very helpful, Glenn. And I'd like to actually just before we go into the Q&A section, I'd like to also offer a few sort of zoom out a little bit and look at this, the geopolitics of this, because once you start, all the granularity is of the forces, et cetera, is very, very important. But we also need to think about the geopolitics of the entire region, because under sort of 2 themes. Theme number 1 is, as Ukraine goes, so goes the Black Sea, and so goes the Black Sea region. So if the guns fall silent and Russia does in fact occupy 20-ish or whatever percent of Ukrainian territory, including 80% of the littoral space, this has very, very negative implications for Ukraine, for NATO, for Moldova, for Georgia, for the Western Balkans, I would argue, and for the broader Black Sea region, Caucasus, Asia Minor, Eastern Med. Russia wants all of the northern Black Sea littoral. They want, including Odessa. They want to build a bridge towards Transnistria and to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Now that may not succeed at this point in time, but when we have to remember even nutcases like Alexander Dugin, who talk about it is an absolute imperative of Russian geopolitics that the Black Sea coast be Moscow under Moscow's control, and that have unfettered control over that. From the entire length of Ukraine and to the Abkhaz territories, that the northern Black Sea coast should be exclusively Eurasian and centrally coordinated from Moscow. Now we ignore these sorts of comments at our peril, even if they're not necessarily realistic at this point. Because we're thinking, you mentioned the word, the sort of the boa constrictor kind of metaphor. That's a very important one, because Ukraine's existence and success as a sovereign independent state depends on its access to the Black Sea coast. And of course, so you have this. So the theme number 1 is, as Ukraine goes, so goes the Black Sea region, because when these Russian naval assets return to the Black Sea and are replaced, the whole nature of the space changes. We've seen how Russia's been able to. We, of course, if you look at a map, there's a map in a paper I wrote last year called the Black Sea. The battle for the Black Sea is not over. There are copies outside if you wish to take one. But if you look at the map of the Black Sea, the exclusive economic zone and the area that Russia can now claim is under its control, extends quite far into the Black Sea, and abuts, of course, Ukraine, Romanian and Bulgarian space, and this has this sort of enables Russia to pursue sort of this gray hybrid warfare strategy that the Admiral was speaking about, and it just changes. It abuts major Romanian energy assets in the Black Sea. the Black Sea Fleet will be able to intimidate naval traffic. It will, it's building, of course, a port in Ochomchire in Georgia. And of course, China its presence is more and more present on the Black Sea coast. And so we have to think of this as a larger space and its connection to Ukraine, because it's, while everybody is focused on the land war and what happens to Ukraine, it has implications that the Romanians are looking at it very, very carefully. Russia has been sort of pursuing a pinprick policy towards Ukraine over the last 3 years, sort of sending drones into its territory, some of which have landed on Romanian territory. It's intimidated Bulgarian naval assets, and it's in fact, and finally today the Romanian Senate has passed a law that will allow Romanian forces to shoot down drones that are intruding into its space. So this is a complex area that of which Ukraine is is the most important part. But it has implications that spill far over across all the littoral states that we also need to consider, because that is what will attract people's more attention. Ukraine, unbelievably important. As it goes, so goes the whole Black Sea region. But then since the Black Sea has always been sort of like on the lower left-hand corner of people's mental map of Europe, and sort of out of the way, and not really sort of with so much focus on the northeastern quadrant, say, for example, or western southern, that map. This other map leads into, there's a Caucasus dimension, there's an Iranian connection, there's a Turkish connection, there's an Eastern Med connection, there's the Western Balkans connection, and all this, the littoral states are watching how this goes, because it has implications for their interests in the region. So I just sort of mention those things because this is all connected. It isn't just some sort of war against Ukraine on the land. It has implications far beyond there that are harder to quantify, harder to characterize, but that people also need to think about because of the implications it has for if you look at what are some of the weaker states in Europe right now. You have Bulgaria, Russian influence rather significant in Bulgaria. You have some instability now in Romania. You have not to mention Serbia. You have Hungary. You have Slovakia, and you have Austria, really, in terms of where Russian influence is rather significant. So you have a sort of a softer underbelly of Europe that is all kind of connected to the Black Sea. So maybe I'll just stop here and we can go into the Q&A section. I see a lot of hands already. Wow. Where do we start? Ma'am in the front. Ma'am. Yes. Ma'am. Yes.
The lady.
I will. Yes, the lady. Sorry,
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah,
The lady,
yeah.
whatever.
Hi, thank you. My name is Yulia Kanal, and I represent Dignitas Foundation, and we were supporting Frontline in Ukraine with drones and technologies and training. So we're very kind of close from the 2022, way before it became like mainstream. So, but as you said, and we recognized the asymmetry of war, that the war should be asymmetric very, very early as a our organization. The question is, and we agree fully that right now the war is extremely asymmetric in the Black Sea. And my question is, how realistic would be, and thank you, Professor Vego, educating us today on sea denial and sea control. So my question would be, how realistic to put, in the case of ceasefire, to have a sea denial for Russia in the Black Sea? Because it seems that kind of right now what we have is working, and changing strategy in the middle would be maybe difficult. But so how realistic is to put sea denial as a part of the security agreements during ceasefire? Thank you.
Okay, good. Sir, in the yes. If you give your name and your affiliation, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Arnis. I'm currently working at the Center for European Policy Analysis, but also from the Latvian Ministry of Defense. So I'll keep it short. Of course, the Baltic states and the Scandinavian allies are very closely looking at what's going on in the Black Sea, whether it's Ukraine's actions, whether it's Russia's actions. So my question to the panel is, do we see Russia learning lessons in their own actions in the Black Sea? And away from what Ukraine is doing, and how do we best coordinate that with the U.S.?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. There, sir. Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Yes. No. Yes, yes, you. The person who's going like this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my question, Bogdan Andrei Hetmansky from the Ukrainian American Veterans. And my question is, you mentioned the Ada-class corvettes that are being built by Turkey. And if I remember correctly, the Mazepa is already completed and the Vyhovsky is in building stage right now. What is the likelihood that they can be delivered to Ukraine prior to the Article 19 being, I guess, implemented or lifted? And is it possible for maybe, because you mentioned that the ports in Odessa aren't capable of handling it, would Romania or Bulgaria, which has some larger ports, be able to have basing operations for Ukraine there so that they can maintain those vessels and kind of off balance or balance off the threat from the Russian back in?
Good question. Okay, so, sir. We'll take one more and then we'll try to answer your questions.
Yuri Makar, just advocate from South Dakota. So we keep talking about how Ukraine has defeated or destroyed 30% of the Russian fleet.
Black Sea Fleet.
Black Sea fleet, I'm sorry. How long does it take for Russia to build a ship and replenish that fleet? So basically, how much time does Ukraine have or to either continue building it so it doesn't get back to like its full potential? And just a quick question to Milan Vego. It's not a maritime topic, but how big of a threat is Serbia?
Well, if I may answer,
Okay. So yeah, let's try to answer your question.
No, I'm saying, this will take time, that depends on how much time we have, let's say, after ceasefire until the new conflict. I'm almost positive, the Russians are not going to stop. They want Ukraine, there's no, in my mind, any, delusions about that. And that takes time and money, and that is competing requirements for the army, also for the reconstruction of the country and so on. So that will take time. But I think, the Ukraine cannot just rely on unmanned vehicles to do job or sea control or sea denial and so on, because this is you need a presence and they need a manned platforms, okay? But that, again, they don't need big ships. They need a multi-purpose corvettes, for example, fast combat craft, the conventional submarines, and some forces for the certain MCM, mine countermeasures and so on, and most important, none of these forces, even they're small, they cannot really survive until you have a strong air and anti-missile defenses in the littoral area. That's a key. Without this, then you have to rely on armored vehicles. There is no other choice.
Okay, Admiral.
Let me add also. Let me add a couple.
Go. Take it away.
Can you raise the volume?
Let me just provide some supplementary comments in terms of what already said. Sorry.
Yes, you're coming in live.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, but can you turn up the volume, please, on your laptop or whatever?
It's okay. Yeah. Do you hear me?
Okay.
Right,
Speak louder.
yeah, I will.
Your command voice.
Yeah, thank you. two comments, if it's possible. First is, then they are speaking about the war in Ukraine, Russian aggression against military aggression against Ukraine. We quite often we try.
We can't hear you.
analyze,
Come on,
Okay.
come on. Try again.
It's okay right now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Quite often, then they are speaking about Russian military aggression against Ukraine. We consider only, land, centric warfare. They consider the situation in Donbass, in Kursk, in the southern part of the Ukraine. So some kind of land-centric approach, some continental approach. We not often see here how it developed at sea and so on. And in this regard, from my perspective, it is important when, because the question was about ceasefire, it is important to include when the framework of ceasefire will consider to include not only land territories, but maritime territories, maritime space as well, because it's different. And of course, they need the different approaches, but it should be included. It's a first, because it's concerned of protection of sea lines, freedom of navigation, and so on. It should be some zones installed, etc. A second aspect is probably I need to bring some clarity. When I spoke about Mosquito assets, it means both manned and unmanned, but small, fast, with low signature, asymmetric in the nature. It means what it's not possible adequately respond on their actions symmetrically. This is, I think, it is important. And if they're speaking about manned platform, such platform as patrol boats, Mark 6, Mark 6, and others mentioned the CB-90, they can provide necessary capabilities after ceasefire regime will be installed to provide protection at sea, both sea control and sea denial missions at sea. Question is what they are not, they have a more robust combat resilience than big ships, large ships, because Mosquito assets, they have a lot. And
we can't hear you. You're going. Okay. All right. Would anybody? We only have a couple more minutes. Walter is getting after us. Okay. All right. So, any one last parting shot, Glenn?
Yes, I'd like to comment that basically the question is that Ukraine, and going to the gentleman's question about the corvettes in Turkey, it's a good point, and I would probably ask Milan this question and Ihor. About redeploying them, or possibly when they're ready to be outfitted, going to Romania, because could those corvettes become like a fleet and being kind of deterrent against Russia operating from Romania? But I don't think the Romanians are ready to go that route yet. But the point here, and that we need to keep in mind, is that Ukrainian government officials like to invest in big, flashy, shiny objects like corvettes. And what has caused endless pain for people like Ihor is that they have wanted to advocate small, fast attack boats that you can get and strike quickly and develop this asymmetrical capability. But what he's tried to point out is that when you get the big, flashy, shiny objects, they have to go to a port. And to sit in a port, they have to have the naval infrastructure in the port to support those operations. And each vessel of these corvettes has 300 men on board. Now, Sweden has given Ukraine 16 of these CB-90 boats, and you could rapidly fill out a whole flotilla of these CB-90s to become an operational arm to operate asymmetrically against the Russians. But the minute you start putting ships in ports, they become a red-eye bullseye for the Russians in striking, and you have to develop the infrastructure, the port, the naval operational, the manpower resources just to operate those two corvettes, which is a long-term situation. So Ukraine has tried to address this problem with a bright, shiny, flashy object aspect to address its problems when it doesn't really help it much operationally. And so it's a dilemma for them, and they're still in this mindset of they want to develop that. And in fact, I've heard that you even use the word mosquito fleet inside the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, that it's verboten. You cannot use that term. They don't like that. And so there's a mentality aspect, and the United States needs to get up, pull itself up by its bootstraps here, and talk to Ukraine and say, look, operationally, we think you need to do this, and stop letting people in the MOD who have their bright, shiny, flashy object predilection and say, look, that's not going to help you that's only going to help you in a long-term solution. What Milan says is great in a long-term, lots of assets, lots of money coming in. That's a long-term solution. But the ceasefire could go bad at any moment. And so you don't know how the Russians are going to react. But the one known is that the Russian fleet assets will return to Crimea. They'll return to the western side of Crimea, and they're going to have an Odessa, and that whole seaboard that goes down the coast of Romania is going to be a big bullseye for the Russians. And so you start putting fleet, corvettes, and first of all, you don't even have a naval base for these corvettes to operate from.
Yep. Okay.
So I'll stop there.
Okay. Walter is telling us this was fascinating. The kinetic part and the geopolitical part, all important. A round of applause to our panelists, please. Yes. Good. And sorry if we took a couple more minutes than we need to.
Oh, we could keep going on. I'm happy.
No. We have Bill Courtney's here. We can't keep Ambassador Courtney waiting.
Shipbuilding capabilities.
You looked at the map of Russian forces.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, but you made the point that that's a dangerous zone and that they will go in one day like this. All right. Anyway, I'm just very, very sorry that we have had these technical difficulties. But so, Ambassador Courtney, Matt, Glen, Admiral Kabanenko, Professor Vego, I really want to thank you. This really was fascinating. We could never do this unless we had.
Why? You're staying in Virginia.
Is Ms. Kelly? Yes, Dr. Kelly Greico is here. General Breedlove is online. Is Minister Zagorodnyuk online?
Zagorodnyuk is online. We're waiting for the general.
We're waiting for the general. And I want to apologize to the audience. We ended up having Ambassador linked into our program. We had a lighter program. We added, and now she's actually been called to the White House. That means there's something very important that's developed. Our VCM sending, usually we substitute for her, it's also been called. There must be something going on. Rumor has it that it might be Zelensky visiting to the United States. Okay, so and we'll have the rest of that session. Okay, so this next discussion panel, I'm just going to hand it over immediately to Ambassador Bill Courtney, and I want to apologize to the previous panel.
Really very good. And so, Ambassador Courtney, you ready?
Walter, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We have three terrific speakers today on the aviation side. General Phil Breedlove is a highly decorated retired general of the United States Air Force. He was Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, following the footsteps of Dwight Eisenhower and others. General Breedlove led the most comprehensive strategic, structural, and policy security changes in NATO's history. He, in addition to being Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, also was commander of the U.S. European Command, and earlier he commanded U.S. Air Forces in Europe. And he was Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Kelly Greico is a senior fellow with the U.S. Grand Strategy Program at the Stimson Center. She has expertise in U.S. military alliances and the security architectures of the Indo-Pacific and Europe. She is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and has her PhD in political science from MIT. And then Andriy Zagorodnyuk served as Minister of Defense of Ukraine from 2019 to 2020. Earlier, he headed the Reform Project Office at the Ministry of Defense. He helped accelerate Ukraine's accession into the NATO Enhanced Partnership Program, and he chairs the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine, a think tank. So we will start with Kelly and go from there. Each of our speakers will speak for 8 minutes, which we will enforce so that we have enough time for our Q&As. Kelly.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay with this microphone? Okay, excellent. First of all, thank you to the organizers for this event and the opportunity to speak about the air war in Ukraine and where it's been, where it's going, and how we might be able to sustain this effort. I've organized my remarks into 3 areas. So I'm going to talk about Ukraine's air power strategy, and then I'll talk about its operations, both tactical and strategic level attacks, and sort of how we may think about that moving into the future, and particularly about how to sustain this level of effort. So just to begin, one of the things I would just say is that, we're 3 years into the war now, and it's really remarkable to think about how widely successful Ukraine has been in keeping back the bulk of the Russian Air Force. And I think it's important to remember that the Russian Air Force is 10 times the size of Ukraine's at the start of the war, and also more technologically advanced. And having succeeded in 3 years in keeping the bulk of that air power back is a remarkable achievement. And I would say that I would put it up there with the Battle of Britain in terms of the success of that achievement and denying air superiority to Russia. I would also say that one of the things that annoys me as someone who studies air power closely is that people in this war will often say that air power doesn't matter. And I would challenge that notion, because I think air power has actually been decisive to this war. That says something more about our limited imaginations about what air power looks like than it does about air power itself. In fact, if Russia were able to unleash the full power of the VKS, I think it would change the course of the war dramatically and make it much harder for Ukraine to hold on to the territory that it has. So again, this is a remarkable achievement. Some of this has had to do with Russian ineptitude, and Justin Bronk and others at RUSI have written about this, and that the Russians really failed early on to conduct a suppression of enemy air defense campaign. They did make an attempt, but they didn't really follow up on that, and some of that is about Russian ineptitude. But I don't actually think that's really the story here. I think it's actually about Ukraine making some very smart strategy choices early on in the war. And so they have practiced what I have called a strategy of air denial. This picks up on what Professor Vego was saying earlier about sea denial. So a strategy of air denial attempts to limit or deny the other side from achieving air superiority. So you may not be able to achieve air superiority yourself, but you're able to deny that air superiority to the other side to keep the airspace contested. And this is essentially what Ukraine has done in 2 ways, maintaining a fleet in being with its mobile ground-based air defenses, and then also conducting attacks, whether that is ground-based air attacks through things like drones, or increasingly these long-range airstrikes, even on Russian soil. And there are 3 reasons I would just say that Ukraine's been really successful with this strategy, and I think helps to understand it and how to sustain it moving forward. The first is that as the defender, it has had enormous advantages, particularly in its ability to employ mobile ground-based air defenses. The terrain is more favorable for cover and concealment, and it's also tackling a simpler military problem. So the Russians attempting to gain air superiority have to deal with not only a ground-to-air threat, but they also have to worry about an air-to-air threat. Whereas Ukraine is, as a mobile defender, has really one problem to focus on, which is the air threat. And it takes advantage of its own terrain and knowing that terrain intimately. The second part of that is a technological explanation, and this is the advantage of mobility and dispersion. This has been critical to allow it to be a force in being. It is really hard to find these launchers, these air defense launchers. This is not a problem that's unique to the Russians, I just would like to point out. The United States has had a lot of challenges with this as well. In Iraq in 1991, we were not able to successfully find any of these mobile Scud launchers the Iraqis were using. That's acknowledged by the Air Force's own study of that war. And in Kosovo in 1999, NATO essentially decided to fly above 15,000 feet as a choice, in part because of the threat from man pads being at lower altitudes and the difficulty in finding those and eliminating them. And so this ability to remain mobile remain mobile and alive and a persistent threat has really been key to holding back the Russian Air Force. And then the third part of this is doctrine. It's practiced what I've written in the past called a doctrine of volumetric defense. And what I mean by that is that it's been able to contest the airspace, not just in terms of distance, meaning like planar distance, but also in terms of altitudes. So it's covered the entire altitudes vertically as well. So using things, of course, like Patriot air defense systems for longer range, things at medium range, and then also lots of man pads. And Ukraine, even early in the war, has shown a real ability to take advantage of that altitude, those different altitudes, to conduct ambushes. There were some reports early on to suggest that Ukraine may have been using the TB2s early in the war because the Russians were having trouble finding them, identifying them, and they were causing a lot of problems for them. So Russian aircraft would try to fly low to find them. And of course, when they did that, Ukrainian air defenders were waiting for them with man pads to strike those aircraft. So this layers of air defense is really important, especially moving forward. So this is still contested, and I think the best evidence we have of that is that the Russians largely avoid entering into Ukrainian airspace. And to the extent that they use air power, it's often now lobbing bombs into Ukraine. So air denial is still largely intact, but it is very much under strain. The problem with air denial, though, is that it is a costly strategy and that it tends to turn this into a battle of attrition in the air. And just looking at some open source data, one of the things we see is that the ratio of losses is about 2 to 1, Ukraine to Russia in terms of air defense systems. And it looks like Ukraine, most of its losses, or a larger share of them anyway, are longer range systems, compared to Russia's losses are weighted towards shorter range air defense systems. And this may be because Russia's particularly prioritized trying to find those longer range systems, but it's also no doubt because Russia's also been able to a large extent, use its own territory as a sanctuary for many of its longer range systems to keep them further back. So it's still intact, but it's becoming harder. And I just want to highlight three areas where I'm particularly concerned about its ability to sustain this kind of strategy. One is US politics. If there are certain niche capabilities that the United States alone provides and that Europe is not going to be able to provide on its own, Patriot interceptors are one of those. Europe does not have a production line. It's building a factory in Germany, but that's not available yet. And the other I would highlight is space-based capabilities, ISR-C2, that have been critical for Ukraine's targeting. The second is that even putting aside US politics for a moment, if that's possible, is the Western industrial base is under serious strain when it comes to air defense systems. Admiral Paparo, who's the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command, recently said, with some of the Patriot missiles that have been employed and some of the air-to-air missiles that have been employed, it's now eating into stocks, and to say otherwise is dishonest. The one place where the United States really faces acute trade-offs between the Indo-Pacific and Ukraine is in the air defense realm. There are other systems that France and Germany and Italy and other countries in Europe are able to provide, like the SAMP-T, which is a medium-range system that can also intercept ballistic missiles and compensate in some ways. But it takes time to fulfill these orders. My understanding is Ukraine has one SAMP-T right now in operation. Another was promised last year by Italy, but from what I can tell, it's still in Kuwait and hasn't been withdrawn yet. And so there's been orders placed for more of these systems, but it's a slow process. France is hoping to have 8 more of these systems by the end of 2030. So this takes time. There's a little bit better news in terms of interceptors. They've stepped up production of interceptors, that kind of system. And I'm less concerned about short-range system and man pads in EW. Things like the IRIS-T and NASAM use standard air-to-air missiles, so that makes it easier for interceptors. And don't see evidence of really that manpads were seeing shortages. But I think the real thing going forward that is also of another concern to me is that as the NATO alliance is under more strain and the Trump administration has signaled that it may pull back more from Europe, one question I think that emerges is, will Europe be willing to provide as much in terms of missile and air defense capabilities to Ukraine, or will they decide that they need to actually keep those back for their own defense and security? So, one thing is you might think Italy is placing orders for new air defense systems, but maybe they could provide them now to Ukraine and backfill it. I think that's going to be a harder decision for countries in Europe to make if they have less confidence in U.S. security guarantees. So I will leave it there.
Kelly, terrific. That's great. You covered more content in less time than any speaker. Mr. Minister, Andriy Zagorodnyuk on? Yes. Yes, please. Yes. You're muted.
Yes. I've seen that already. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for invitation. It's great to see you, everybody. Some familiar faces in the audience, and Kelly, thank you for your great presentation. It's of course it's a very crucial time for obvious reasons, and I would like to mention a few facts. They are not in a particular order, but just so we kind of put them all together and understand the picture. So first of all, our absolute certainty is that the discussion whether Ukraine needs air power or not, there were a debate on that, basically costed us enormous amount of effort and enormous amount of resources and lives of people, because in any modern warfare, to imagine that the warfare is fought without the air power is just completely inconceivable. And for some reason, there's been a certain movement that in Ukraine it's not necessarily the case. So Ukraine has some special case where Ukraine can just get away with the ground capabilities and air defense, and yes, provide the air denial that Russia cannot approach our airspace, but then that's it. That we shouldn't be asking for more. We spent several years of debating on that, and that debate eventually ended, because yes, there's been a training of pilots, and then there's been a preparation of the infrastructure and so on, but the cost of that was huge. First of all, that still didn't close the problem that Russian aviation is approaching our line of contact from the safe distance and using the gliding bombs. Gliding bombs, as you all know, is a huge problem. It's still a huge problem. And they've been using it hundreds of months at some point, at least until recently. And basically, we had some enormous losses based on that. Those losses, essentially, they address the positional warfare, which we had for a while, and which we still have in many areas, and essentially destroyed the ability of us to hold the lines, and also producing some very serious casualties, both on the military and the civilian side. There's nothing could be done about that unless we have competitive aviation, and Ukraine, after all these years, 3 years of war, has zero, no competitive aircraft right now against Russians. So we cannot keep Russian aviation away from the front, from the line of contact. And there's been discussions about, is there anything can be done about that? But the only way to keep is to have better radars, better missile systems, so basically competitive aircraft. That's the only solution. So when we're talking about the future force, when we're talking about some future decisions and the future solutions for the, there is absolutely no way we can avoid that topic. And we can just talk about, what we can do on the ground, what sort of systems we can, like land systems and equipment and drones and everything else, but we just cannot avoid the topic of the aviation. It's just, there's not, like tactical aviation, manned aviation. It needs to be addressed. Right now, it's not addressed. So right now we are asking our partners for the used planes. which are still subject of the export control restrictions, and their systems, they're not connected to systems such as Link 16. There's no policy decisions on that. So there's a whole bunch of problems which are not even close to be approached. And there's no proper discussion on modernization of the planes. So even the ones we have, we still cannot modernize them and so on. As longer we delay that discussion, as longer we delay those policy decisions, more we come to the situation that we're basically going to be losing at best. So not winning and losing at best. And Russians will know that. And so if we're talking about, I don't want to obviously discuss the recent political news, which are, of course, quite concerning, let's put it this way. But one of the things is that we'll talk about the long-term security arrangements right now. If these long-term security arrangements do not resolve the air power question, they will not have a deterrent effect. So essentially, they will not serve the purpose. We can commit tens of billions, or hundreds of billions, whatever you like, but if the air power issue is not addressed, the Russians will be working on the questions of controlling airspace, and they will not consider those capabilities as having a deterrent effect. So we will waste, first of all, those efforts, and secondly, we seriously will risk with a second strike or second campaign. Second, starting from the full-scale invasion, obviously, it's not going to be second in a long war. Now Russians do enjoy air superiority in areas close to the battle space. All who has been in around this area have seen that. Lots of people could see the Russian planes coming very, very close to the line of contact, throwing the bombs and then basically flying back. And we have seen that so many times that in some areas of the line of contact, there's been a saying that essentially Russians do have air superiority because they could see Russian planes on a daily basis numerous times, and there's nothing we could do. We at the same time, of course we need to understand that drones essentially invented their own echelons of airspace. And so the discussion, there's a lot of talk about among the professionals, which we follow, about the notion of air superiority, just a concept of air superiority, how relevant it is now. And the discussion is that the people talking about windows of air superiority, they're talking about the parts of the airspace under control, and some other parts are not under control. So we do see that the drones, including they're growing in size and basically getting more complex every day. There's new models being introduced on a regular basis. They essentially can operate in parts of airspace regardless of the presence of the tactical aviation in the same area. They just operate in a different altitudes with different speeds. But more importantly, the concept of the affordable mass is a key here. So essentially, yes, you can destroy a drone one or another one, but when we have 200 at the same time, then there's very often no solutions about that at all. And we experience this on a daily basis. So last night there's been 100 and something drones entered the airspace of Ukraine, and very recently we had a record number over 200. Coming at the same night, at the same time. So these things are not going to be going away anywhere by themselves. We see the new factories being built. We see that this axis of evil of building new factories. Iran is developing, North Korea is developing. So we will have a drone warfare wars pretty much full scale. And they're going to dominate the battle space in general, and changing the existing concepts, changing the existence approaches. Whoever is interested in this topic, there's been some already publications, even in Russian analytical press, where they are judging the expediency of investing in the armored vehicles, expediency in investing in tanks. And so on, like standard classical conventional warfare land equipment, taking into account that in the current war, the distance of like from 0 to 40 kilometers is essentially full of small aerial devices which can locate any equipment on the ground within a minute and basically destroy within the next few minutes. So essentially, but the notion that the tactical aviation is going to go away because of the development of the drone, so like unmanned systems, is so far is not supported at all. So they are operating with a different concepts of operation, with a different altitudes, different missions, different type of, and we don't see right now, at least subjective opinion, but nevertheless, we don't see this going away anywhere. So we will have a subdivided airspace with a different types of missions at the same time running, but the classical systems will stay relevant at least for the foreseeable future. And that's why this is absolutely critical for us to resolve this on a policy level. There's lots of proposals we're discussing with different companies, with Europe. Europe wants to participate. Europe wants to provide us with the even older systems, but still, as you know, there's French already providing Mirages. And I guess that's a beginning of the process of diversification, which has its own challenges with maintenance and operation training, whatever, But at the same time, there are a lot of licenses and there are a lot of cross-country licenses there, including United States, and systems which connect. They sold in the system of systems. Link 16 issue being published recently. You all know about that problem, but that's just one of many. And finally, there's a very substantial discussion in Europe right now about the longer-term presence of possible European troops in Ukrainian airspace, with some rules of engagement. This is a very heated discussion. It's in the very beginning, but when there's been a discussion of boots on the ground, right now, at least some of those talks are shifting into the airman boots, not the infantry boots. And we have to know that it started and it's very far from over, and it's just a beginning. But it's on, and there are some serious policy meetings in European capitals discussing this, like as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Let's do the same thing. We'll take 3 questions and then ask our panelists. So back here. We need the microphone for other people.
I'm Doug Hiller. I was an F-16 instructor pilot, and I was based in Hahn Air Base in Germany for 6 years during the Cold War, which worked out okay, but things have gone downhill since then. And I want to piggyback on some of the things that Kelly said about drones and how effective they are and how important they are. When I was in the Air Force, we knew that the best defense is a damn good offense. And I think the best offense we could find right now, where I am optimistic with how Ukraine's going to fight the rest of this war, is with their long-range fixed-wing drones, preferably jet engine-powered, because that's the best opportunity to employ stealth technology. And if we launch 50 drones against Russian industry or airfields or oil refineries, and I'd love to see those headlines come out in both Kyiv Post and Kyiv Independent. If we launch 50 drones and they shoot down 45, we've done well. But if with stealth technology we get 15 or 25 through, think how much better that can be. And there may be some people in the drone business who could be qualified to answer the question, do we have stealth technology coming into our drone manufacturer that is really good? And that could come from Europe too. And drone technology can be at least done in increments, could involve just the paint that's applied to the wings and the exterior surface. And it's almost impossible to make a propeller-driven drone stealthy because of the propeller. But a jet engine, if it's mounted correctly, can be made stealthy. So I'm really hoping that we are getting stealth technology from Europe or the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. And the white sweater.
Yes, thank you very much. Alec Kasman, Protect Ukraine Now. Many of us here advocates for Ukraine, and specifically our organizations is talking for the longest time that Ukraine is not provided with proper aircraft. Specifically, Link 16 is missing, and other characteristics, like, for example, like block numbers are not there, like the notifications and things that are really appropriate for the warfare today. Can you give us some talk points for things we should be mentioning next time we meet with senators, Congress people, so we can properly explain the equipment that Ukraine needs today and why that's important? Thank you.
Okay, and here, third question here. And then we'll make another round after this.
Hi there, Yuri Makar, South Dakota Advocate. How can it be possible to create a combined air defense? How can it be possible to create a combined air defense such as Israel with the Iron Dome, David, Slingshot, Arrow, as well as what happened with Israel when Iran shot its missiles to have allies shoot down those missiles to help? In addition, to make it cost effective where we don't have a Patriot missile shoot down a simple drone.
Okay, Kelly first, and then Zagorodnyuk.
Sure. These are all excellent questions. I think I'll start with the last one, if that's okay. So, you know, one is on the last point about not using a Patriot to shoot down a drone. My sense is Ukraine has actually gotten really good at not doing that. It's interesting when you look at the Russians, they seem to use their air defense systems for just about shooting at everything. They're not very disciplined in how they use them, so which suggests they don't have the same kind of resource constraints. But what we've heard, you know, at least coming out from reporting, is that Ukraine is increasingly relying on things like Gepard, EW for particularly Shahed drones. Than trying to conserve the Patriots. So that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue, but I understand the point. I would just say that in terms of the idea of what happened with Israel and these sort of two incidents of Iran attacking and then this sort of coalition of some sort responding, I think there are a couple of things here. One is that Israel has the advantage of being small over Ukraine, and just in terms of what it requires in terms of forward air defenses, right? There's just a scale issue for Ukraine, larger territory. The other thing I would just say, though, is that in my opinion, the attacks that Iran launched on Israel have a little bit of an operational theater quality to them. So like the first one, they notified through emissaries. Essentially, we knew what time it was going to start. If you remember, the president returned to the White House, right? So I think it was meant to be intercepted. And even the second attack, like they did not conduct these attacks in ways that I would expect if you wanted to actually succeed in really striking targets. And I don't think the Russians are not engaged in that kind of operational theater, unfortunately. So I just say that. But talking about the bigger issue of aircraft here, so just a couple of things. One is that, you know, Russia has very serious and dense air defense threats. I know that this is a crowd that understands that completely with S-400s, things like that. The F-16 is not an aircraft that is going to be survivable in that kind of environment. That's just the reality of it, right? You know, so in thinking that, yes, I know Ukraine wants aircraft and would like to think that it could gain air superiority and to then be able to change its fortunes on the front, that is not, I think, something that's realistic with the kind of aircraft we're talking about. And I would just note that this is something I would be saying to the United States Air Force. You know, if you look at the U.S. Air Force right now, it's going through a force design. And it's talking about what it will do in an environment like Ukraine's facing, where it's high threats in the air and high threats on the ground. And it's talking about something calling Mission Area 1, where it's talking about fighting asymmetrically. And so I think that's something just to emphasize. Where the aircraft become, I think, more important is actually after a ceasefire. You know, there is a ceasefire, is that I would expect Russia will, you want two types of air forces in some sense. One, you're going to want this more asymmetric air force that will be so important for deterrence and for denial, so the Russians do not believe that they could start this war again and gain air superiority and then have success. But then you're also going to have to deal with gray zone issues from Russia. I expect that the Russians will start, you know, doing what the Russians do, that they'll try to encroach into airspace, into Ukrainian airspace with bombers and fighters. And so you'll need some ability to respond with fighter aircraft or something like that. And I think that's where those fighters become more important. And I was just did some quick, very dirty math here on what those requirements might look like. If it takes about 15 minutes to get up in the air from the time of an alert, which is what the U.S. Air Force uses, and then it takes, say, 5 to 7 minutes to get to the point where you need to intercept, which means you'd have to have these fairly close to the border. That's about, with wings, maybe, about 40, 50 aircraft, but you need, at least in the United States, it's often like 4 times as many aircraft are required in order to, like 20 aircraft are required to have 4 that are up in the air. And so that would be, maybe about 165, 175 aircraft, fighter aircraft that you'd want to have to be able to respond to attempts to intrude on the airspace. And I think there is some real truth that you need to start doing that kind of work now, certainly about getting the aircraft and the right kinds of aircraft. And I think the pilot training issue becomes really important long-term. Pilots are expensive to train. It takes years to train pilots. And I know that there's more being done in the West, but I think ultimately for Ukraine to be able to build up its own air training school, it had that in the past. There's been some articles written by one of the former directors of that training school. I think bringing something that home to Ukraine as well.
Okay. So thankfully, General Breedlove is now with us. So let me turn to General Breedlove. General, if you could make opening comments of about 8 minutes or so.
Okay, great. Let me first apologize. My doctor kept me an hour longer than expected, and I left with a chunk of flesh in his hand. So sorry for being a little bit late. I'm glad that I caught the latter part of Kelly's remarks. They are, of course, well thought. I might disagree with a few of them and offer a little bit different view. One of the great lessons that I think we do not want to learn from this war is the value of having air superiority. I believe that drones are very much a part of the future. And just as a short reminder, I hated that word drones or unmanned vehicles in the beginning of this war, because we need to remember that there's a pilot flying all of these things. And so there are men and women in the loop at this point, and these are not pilotless operations that anyone is considering for any near part of the future. So the point that I would like to make is that as I have discussed this with learned colleagues and have talked to our Air Force planners and things about the new Mission Area 1, et cetera, there is broad agreement that if you establish air superiority, whether you're on the red side or the blue side, it is going to advantage your drone operations and disadvantage your opponent's drone operations. And that is a long story to tell that I can't get in 8 minutes, but it's broadly felt that if you can hold control of the sky, it will be easier for you to sort and engage the red drones, and it will also enable your drones and save them from some of the defensive actions that are there. So we should not just cast away the idea that one wants to establish air superiority. To the cost of doing that in today's environment, I just remember as we went into Desert Storm 1, and we were looking at the super mez over Baghdad, for those of you who are old enough to remember this whole conversation. And the prognosticators at the time said that we would lose hundreds of aircrafts and we would probably take months to establish air superiority. In the end game, we lost 5 aircraft and we did it in about 3.5 days. The bottom line here is that the world has forgotten, and certainly the Russians have not developed a capability to do SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. We in the United States still retain the capability of doing SEAD, and I believe that we would be giving away advantage that we should accept, own, and utilize should we not determine to do that in any future war. And my supposition, of course, it's completely selfish because it was one of the things I recommended as the SACUR back in 2014. Should we have put CAP in the air, and should we have put suppression of enemy Air Force defense capabilities, meaning Block 50 F-16s, forward, that war may have proceeded very differently than it did. And after rolling those few grenades out on the table, we'll let them go off, and then I'm sure someone will offer me some sage advice. How about that?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zagorodnyuk, would you like to comment on any of the previous questions or or General Breedlove's comment?
No, well, I'm very happy to see General. Again, I will, yes, sir, hello. I will comment on previous ones, yes. So first of all, why don't we shoot drones with the Patriots? Well, as I said before, we have sometimes over 100 a night. That's basically the answer. And the cost of the Shahed drone is between 50 and 200,000. Versus several million per Patriot, and they are scarce availability. So there's absolutely no point. We have to, we use different other air defense systems. I have seen one working above my head in Zhytomyr literally yesterday morning. When Zhytomyr was attacked by drones in the morning of about 6 o'clock in the morning yesterday. Yeah, this is we do combine all different available equipment in different places. The thing is that then against these types of drones, we need something completely different. We cannot wait them to come to city and then address that, or closer to the city, like in the outskirts of the city. We need to be able to intercept them as soon as they cross the border. And for that, we probably need like drone interceptors. And there's been a whole chain of projects right now as we speak about the drone interceptors, some of them being tested. As we understand, some of them are more successful than the others. But and I guess some solution is coming, because essentially what we see right now is the it's a 3 meter kind of a wingspan device with carrying 50 to 100 kilos with the speed of 188 kilometers per hour. It's not something we definitely can see them, we definitely can spot them, we can trace them all the way through Ukraine, and for that we need to be able to down it in areas where actually when falling it doesn't hurt the infrastructure, civilian buildings and so on. But definitely not with the expensive fire defense systems. Secondly, what can be done during the advocacy, and what can be said? Frankly speaking, I think the days when advocacy of specific systems been advised are over. I think we should advise the operations. I think we should advocate for the ability to do certain operations, and then the systems as enablers of those operations. Because a discussion, we need that type of weapons, or we need that type of weapons, constantly meets the counter arguments, which is if you're advocating in Congress or somewhere where the attention span is very little and technical knowledge also can be very little, it could be just unproductive. There's been an enormous amount of advocacy time wasted on trying to advocate for some weapon systems, which basically it's like being some people say that, oh, we need that, and then somebody else says no, they don't need that, and then give some kind of explanation. So the best idea is to try to explain what type of operations Ukraine need to do, why, and then say, okay, what Ukraine does not have any systems for enabling, like weapon systems enabling those operations. So let's think what we can do so we can do those operations. Perhaps that would be the solution. And finally, about the stealth drones, I know the couple projects on this coming. It's very difficult to say whether well, first of all, there are jet drones already in Ukraine. There are very advanced projects in the jet drones. Some of them do think and do work on a kind of stealth technologies. However, I have to say there's not much been success in there yet. And so the approach was affordable mass. So essentially overloading the air defense by sending a lot of decoy drones or a lot of other ones, and then basically creating a corridor in which the more expensive ones can sneak in. That's what Ukraine is doing right now. It's not perfect, but so far that's it. But I know that there's been a project in progress. Thank you.
If I could, I would never pretend to correct Andriy. I love how he speaks. I would like to change something he said. So he said we would we need to be able to shoot them when they come across the line. I don't sign up to that at all. I think we need policy that allows us to kill them before they cross the line.
Right.
And
right.
one of the reasons for developing air superiority over your own area is then you can push your fighters forward so you can attrit the Russians inside of Russia. Now, before the war starts, this may not be acceptable in a policy sense, but the war is on. And so we should be killing these systems in their area. And more importantly, if you remember the arguments we've had in the past about archers versus arrows, we should be killing the archers on the ground in Russia. A fighter pilot will tell you that the best defense is a good offense. We need to be going offensive to create defensive capability over Ukraine. And so, Andriy, if you would allow me, I would say we should be killing them on their side.
I fully agree, sir. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. The only exception, the only gray area and very difficult area is that they sent a lot from Belarus, which we are technically not in the war with, and they would love to see us shooting Belarus targets so they can convince Belarus to join. So that's the only thing. But on Russian territory, 100%, I agree. Like no question. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, let's take 3 final questions. So please make your questions short, and then we'll turn to our panelists to answer them. Yes, Slavko?
Thank you. My name is Yaroslav Martinyuk, formerly researcher with Radio Liberty. My question is straightforward. There's been a change in leadership in Germany, and Chancellor Merz apparently is much more pro-Ukraine than Chancellor Scholz was. And one of the things he said that Germany is ready to deliver part of its 600 stock of Taurus missiles to Ukraine. The question for Kelly and others is, how likely is that to happen, and could that be a game changer? Thank you.
Another question? Yes.
I was going to ask the same question, but I'll ask another question. When we went into Kursk in August, right? That was the time we also heard that the F-16s in Ukraine became operational. That's my question.
Okay, third question? Okay, just these 2 questions. So first, Kelly, Andriy, and then General Breedlove.
Sure. So I guess I'm not a German politics expert, so I can't really speak to the intricacies of that in terms of leadership and the coalition. And perhaps the other speakers can speak about that. I think the bigger question here, and we kind of have a tendency to fixate on particular missile systems like Taurus or ATACMS, different things like that. I think the bigger question, which I think General Breedlove is getting at, is a strategy question. So while I would differ with him in terms of whether the Iraq war is applicable to Ukraine's situation, given, we primarily were taking out fixed air defense assets, different EW environment, and the air-to-air threat was also quite different. I do agree with him that one option for Ukraine is a counter-offensive, counter-air campaign, offensive air campaign, which is what it's been doing with these longer-range strategic attacks against ammunition depots, logistics behind the line. I think the biggest challenge for Ukraine with this kind of campaign in terms of its ability to impact Russia's ability to send these Shahed drones is just the size of Russia is a problem. And that, as we've seen, they're able to pull things further back and move them, and they take advantage of their defense in depth. One thing, though, I think that it does at least do is every country has some resource constraints, even Russia. And so it does force them to have to make harder choices about where to put their air defense systems. And so I think that's actually probably a key part of it as well, is it does create, at least require them to move things further back to try to defend these assets. It does add inefficiencies into their systems. But this is one area where just the size of Russia matters. I'll let the others.
All right. Andriy?
So I'll add on this. Shahed drones are launched with the booster, hard rocket fuel, small rocket. which basically allows them to launch from anywhere. You don't need a runway. You don't need any kind of a specific infrastructure for that. And that makes it very difficult to spot the locations where they launch from and react quickly. That's just for you, just for the audience to know. Secondly, well, of course, the Taurus is the first of all policy question, but if they're provided, whether they could be a game changer, I think that we need to look at the combining again. So any single system, if it's used for nutritional purposes, in isolation from everything else, is a kind of relative game changer. It's difficult. However, if it's used in combined operation with some long-term effects in mind, then it could be. So what I mean by that is that some of the drones are already working as the replacement for the small diameter aerial bombs, simply because the way how they use and what targets they address. And if you look at your American Air Force Doctrine 303, counter land operations, you have a part there called air interdiction. And so that part of the doctrine potentially could be enabled by combining the long-range drones in addition to the missile strikes for high-value targets. And if these combinations are done, which we do now, then yes, then basically drones work as a very substantial multiplier for the effects of the high-value missile systems. And then they can all together could be potentially making a substantial progress, yes, to the extent we can call them a game changer. Thank you.
General Breedlove.
Well, first of all, offering the Taurus is a great message, among other things, that Germany has a change of position and that they are going to support Ukraine in a different way. I don't think I would use game changer in relation to any weapons system, even to the F-16 I flew my whole life. What would be a game changer is policy. Nations have not said what they're there to do. And we've had these soft statements that we're going to be there as long as it takes, or we're going to give them everything they need. And the answer to the question is not there. To do what? What would be a game changer is if the Western nations, NATO, the United States, or just a coalition of large old NATO nations were to come out and say, we're going to be there as long as it takes for Ukraine to defeat Russia and expel them from Russian territory. Now that is a game changer. That will force changes in what Russia is thinking and doing. So as much as I applaud the Taurus, as much as I would applaud the F-16s, which I'm about to talk a little bit more later, they won't change anything in Mr. Putin's calculus at the speed and numbers that we're getting to Ukraine. I absolutely support getting them to Ukraine so they can inflict more damage on Russia, but it's going to take more than that to be a game changer. As far as the relationship of Kursk and the F-16s, as I just admitted, I'm a bit jaded when it comes to the F-16, having flown it for 24 of my 29 flying years. But at the numbers that we are giving Ukraine, the F-16, it's going to be a long time before it truly starts to have the effect on the battlefield that it might in a different situation. We really haven't given them a wing's worth of aircraft yet. Maybe, almost a squadron and a half or two, and if that numbers, these are important and it's good and it's proper and I love it, but they're not going to have massive impact, game-changing impact either. It is still astounding to me that we, the United States, have so many Block 30 midlife upgrade aircraft sitting in the desert, which are already more advanced than the ones that we have given to, not we haven't given them anything in the United States, but our allies has given Ukraine. The airplanes that we have sitting in the desert have more advanced radar, avionics, software, etc. And we in the United States have not given any U.S. flagged F-16s to Ukraine. This is, to me, a policy decision that has hurt our friend. And to me, again, what we need is change of policy. And then we might actually have some game-changing effects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's thank all of our speakers for really a terrific panel, and we'll go to lunch.
Thank you.
Andriy, good to see you. Sorry I was late, guys.
No, thank you. It was great to see you as well.
Kelly, we need to have a beer and talk about
Hope you're okay.
Talk about what U.S. fifth generation flying and other flag nations are doing amongst the S-400. I don't think the S-400 is what it's cut up to be, but we'll have that conversation over a beer maybe. Thanks.
Yeah, we went to grad school together. Yeah. From the same time, yeah. Same guy. He's writing a lot of